Welcome everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you for joining me. This is Top 5 Glam Metal Bands of 1990, and the genre itself had its foundations laid all the way back in 1981 by bands like Dokken and Motley Crue, and continued with bands like Rat in 1983, but glam metal didn't fully kick off until 1986 with bands like Poison and Cinderella. And 1990 was a banner year with lots of great releases, marked by two things. We had established bands stripping away that overt glam sound and look, while there were new bands seemingly popping up everywhere. And while a good thing at the time, it would ultimately be the genre's own downfall, as there would be just too many bands and the market would be flooded. Now, before we go any further though, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please click the button. Also, leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you know someone that would enjoy this video, please share it, help get the word out that way. I would also appreciate that. And of course, by subscribing, you'll be able to stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this with Top 5 Glam Metal Albums of 1990. Now, on a side note, I want to explain why I use the term glam metal, and it's because it was a term used at the time during the era. Hair metal and hair bands wasn't terminology used at the time. It came much later, case in point like that book behind me. And then terms like hard rock and heavy metal, it's just too general, too simple of a term, and doesn't define the era or the sound. And that's why I use the term glam metal. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there was just a number of really great bands coming out, debut albums getting released, and I've got a few of those to run through briefly. We've got Spread Eagle, their debut album, which is really great. Electric Angels, this one's phenomenal. Check that one out if you don't know it. Steel Heart's debut. Now, a lot of people think this came out in 1991 because it was reissued then, but it actually came out in 1990. And then Salty Dog, Every Dog Has Its Day, and London Choir Boys, A Bit of What You Fancy, and Sweet F.A., Stick to Your Guns. All really great albums by debut bands there, worth checking out. And I've got two honorable mentions to talk about here before we jump into the top 5. And the first one up being Trickster, and this album here, which is their official debut, although they did record an album in 1988. It was called Just Having Fun, but it was never released. So the one we were just looking at there, that was ultimately their debut, and it came out and peaked at number 28 on the Billboard 200 album chart. The album itself was much more hard rock and had less of the glam metal sound to it, as well as the band's image. They were much more into jeans and flannel, which of course would become a focal point of the grunge movement a year later in 1991, but these guys here were already showing that. And the album itself featured the Billboard Hot 100 charting hits, Give It To Me Good, which went to number 65, Surrender, which went to number 72, and One in a Million, which went to number 75. Ultimately, the album itself would be certified gold. And the second honorable mention to go through is Extreme Pornograffiti. It is their second studio album, and the album itself peaked at number 10 on the Billboard 200 album chart. It was very successful for them, had all the hallmarks of a great glam metal album, over-the-top vocals, big flashy guitars, tongue-in-cheek lyrics, but the album's sound was quite broad, mixing in different elements like hard rock, metal, funk, rap, and acoustic instrumentation, making Extreme not your typical glam metal band of the day. And the first two singles that came off the album were much more hard rock than the fare that would come later on. We had Decadence Dance and Get the Funk Out, which actually features Pat Travers on guitar. And then the next two singles that came out were top 10 Billboard Hot 100 hits. More Than Words went all the way to number 1, which was the acoustic ballad, and then Wholehearted, which went to number 4, which was another acoustic infused song itself. The album itself was ultimately certified 2 times platinum. Okay, and that brings us to the top 5 glam metal albums of 1990, and coming in at number 5 is Winger, In the Heart of the Young, second studio album by these guys. Essentially, the band was a super group, although they weren't marketed that way at the time. It did feature Kip Winger on bass and vocals, coming from Alice Cooper playing with him and recording with him, Red Beach on guitar, who was an in-demand session player at the time, Rod Morgenstein on drums coming from the Dixie Dregs, and Paul Taylor on guitar. and keyboards, who toured with Aldo Nova. He appeared in the Fantasy video, and then he also toured with Alice Cooper as well. And the band combined elements of metal, progressive rock, and glam all into one, but this album here had much less of the progressive rock nature to it, although the album had a much more rock edge than the debut itself, but still had very radio-friendly songs, and it featured the Billboard Hot 100 charting hits Can't Get Enough, which went to number 42, Miles Away, which went to number 12, and Easy Come, Easy Go, which went to number 41. The album itself would ultimately be certified platinum. Okay, coming in at number 4 is Warrant in Cherry Pie, second studio album by these guys, and like its predecessor, the album itself featured themes of sex, love and devotion, and betrayal and heartbreak. And the album's title track and biggest hit, Cherry Pie, reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, but it wasn't without controversy. The album itself had been completed. It was supposed to be called Uncle Tom's Cabin, but the record label felt that it needed one more song, an anthem of sorts, and so Jani Lane responded by writing Cherry Pie in 15 minutes. And he didn't mean for it to be a hit, but of course, as we know, it backfired. And, you know, he's always regretted the song ever since. And while I understand his reason why, as he didn't want to be known for having written the song Cherry Pie, it's a great tongue-in-cheek party rock song that's indicative of the era. There was another top 10 hit on the album itself, I Saw Red. There were two versions of that song, actually, the electric studio version, which is on the album, and an acoustic rendition of it, and then they actually filmed 2 music videos for it. That's how popular the song was. And 2 additional singles were released as well, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and as I mentioned, the original title track, and Blind Faith, and then the album itself was ultimately certified 2 times platinum. Okay, coming in at number 3, we have Slaughter in their debut album. This one here features 2 former members of the Vinnie Vincent Invasion, Mark Slaughter on vocals and guitar, and Dana Strum on bass. And what I find interesting is that they didn't market the album that way. At least I never saw it done that way. They allowed the band to stand on their own 2 feet. And what actually happened was Vinnie Vincent had exceeded his credit limit with the record label, and the record label took the contract away from him and gave it to the band Slaughter. And then the band actually wrote about that behavior in the song Burning Bridges. So if you want to know a little inside scoop on it, listen to that song. The album itself is expertly crafted, glam metal of the day, and produced just beautifully, and of course defined by Mark Slaughter's trademark vocals, and featured 3 top 40 Billboard Hot 100 hits, with the songs Up All Night going to number 27, Flight of the Angels going to number 19, and Spend My Life going to number 39. There was a 4th single released as well, Mad About You, and the album itself would be certified double platinum. Okay, coming in at number 2, we have Cinderella and Heartbreak Station, 3rd studio album for these guys, and it was the last to feature drummer Fred Coury before he left to join Stephen Pearcy's Arcade, which is a fantastic project in and of itself and worthy of a mention. The album continued to strip away the overt glam metal sound, as did other bands, and they of course emphasized more of the blues rock and mature song stylings that they were going towards. Although the album itself is still a really good dirty hard rock album like classic 70s rock bands. Its predecessor, which had more of the glam in it than this album here, but I felt this album here was a transitional type album, with the first half of this album being much more classic Cinderella, and the second half of the album being that much more blues-based and mature sounding style of the band. And I think had the band actually made another album in quicker succession than waiting 4 years for When Still Climbing came out, I think it would have taken on the tone of the second half of the album. Of course, we'll never know at this point. The album itself featured 2 charting singles on the Billboard Hot 100, Shelter Me, which went to number 36, and Heartbreak Station, which went to number 44. And a 3rd single was released, The More Things Change, and the album itself would ultimately be certified platinum. All right, coming in at number 1, Poison and Flesh and Blood, third studio album by these guys. It peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 200 album chart. And the album itself marked an end of the extreme glam metal elements that had been on previous albums. Gone was the extreme hair and makeup. And this album here was more hard rock and sound. Like other bands, they were also emphasizing a bit of that blues element. But this one here still had plenty of the party rock elements on this album itself. And before it was, almost completely removed by 1993 when they did Native Tongue, they still retained some of that here. Now, like their last album cover for Open Up and Say Ah, this one here had controversy surrounding it ultimately being censored as well. And so this here, which is the original album cover, as you can see, the tattoo itself is more swollen and red, and it shows blood dripping down from it. Ultimately, they cleaned up the image, photoshopped it, removed all of that, and that's what's out there today for the album cover. Not really sure, again, why that was considered controversial and or needing to be censored, but ultimately it was. The album itself featured 2 top 10 singles on the Billboard Hot 100, Unskinny Bop, which went to number 3, and Something to Believe In, which went to number 5. And then 2 additional singles which charted on the Billboard Hot 100. We have Ride the Wind, which went to number 38, and Life Goes On, number 35. So 2 top 40 hits there. Actually, all 4 are top 40 hits. The album itself was ultimately certified 3 times platinum and sold over 7 million copies around the world. And so there you go, top 5 glam metal albums of 1990. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Certainly let me know your thoughts. Let me know what your top 5 list is, and or if I left out what you think is a great band that should have been included. I would be interested to hear. Leave me your comments, your thoughts. Certainly have a great day. I'll talk to you all real soon. Bye, everyone.